We should remove the minimum voting age entirely. This is baby Miss O'Hearn. It has always been her dream to go down to the ballot box and cast her vote. So, come November, Miss O'Hearn went to her dad and asked,
Dada, can we go to the vote center to vote?
but little did she know, she wouldn't be able to vote, because children aren't allowed to vote.
Dada, why can't I vote?
Well, let's talk about the obvious reasons why not. First, children aren't smart enough to understand political policies and can't decide their candidate properly due to their lacking thinking skills. Secondly, children lack the emotional maturity for voting. Voting is very important, policy having lots of tension, so it would be bad to put children through that. And also, they can easily be emotionally manipulated through propaganda. Lastly, it can cause family division, like if a child and a parent vote differently, that would bring chaos into the house.
But aren't those arguments against women's suffrage?
I want to convince you to let Lil Hearn vote. And to do so, we must first figure out if there are any arguments against letting children vote that wouldn't undermine our current voting protections. That brings me to one of my research questions. To what extent does cognitive development and emotional maturity affect the quality of voting decisions based on age groups? According to the American National Election Studies, which has been collecting voting data since 1940, people at all ages don't really know much about policy and government to begin with. People don't know policy details and which party controls which part of the government currently. In a 2024 civics literacy quiz by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, over 70% of Americans failed the quiz, which was made up of questions like, what were the 3 branches of government and how many Supreme Court justices are there? Also, people use voting shortcuts all the time. People use party labels, candidate appearance, endorsements, the ordering of a ballot, and even if a name is just familiar on the ballot. Over 80% of voters in 2020 planned on voting consistently for one party, and an MIT election study showed that about 2/3 of people did straight ticket voting, which, if you forgot what straight ticket voting was, it's just voting all for one party, just right down the ballot. Also, people of all ages are becoming more emotionally attached to parties. People interpret facts through bias, like watching the same media outlets over and over in a confirmation bias echo chamber, and decisions are often based on identity and feelings. This happens across all age groups, so this lack of voter competency all around isn't correlated to one's cognitive stage. So the bar for voter competency is pretty low, but you could argue that this data is only applicable for those above 16, since that's the only demographic that these sources get data from. But this doesn't account for those who have different cognitive development, such as those with Down syndrome and autism. Many of these people can't even legally give consent, but can still vote. There are also those with stunted cognitive development, like those who got an injury when young or those who chose a history degree, so some people literally have a child's brain and can still vote. So in short, everyone makes highly emotional votes backed with low political knowledge. People with underdeveloped and non-standard cognitive development can still vote. So what that means is there is currently no standards regarding cognitive development that would be applicable to ban children from voting, besides it just being the norm that children can't vote. So we got a little bit of a problem. People are dumb as children, have the same brain as a kid, but still can vote. But children, citizens of the United States, can't practice their rights and vote. And actually in the past, people saw this problem and got together to fix it. The 26th Amendment passed in 1971 lowered the voting age during the Vietnam War era from 21 to 18. Since it already lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, there are actually some applicable arguments for no voting age. So for a little bit of context for the 26th Amendment, so at the time before 1971, the voting age was 21, and this was around the time of the Vietnam War, so 18-year-olds were being drafted and sent off to war before they can even legally vote. So people weren't happy about the fact that they were old enough to fight, but not old enough to vote. And so some of the main arguments for the 26th Amendment was that 18 to 20-year-olds paid taxes but couldn't vote. They can get drafted. 18 is just like mature enough, and more inclusion makes a stronger democracy. But if you really think about it, there are actually children in the workforce. So does taxation without representation apply indirectly to minors? Well, the principle of taxation without representation is that people who are affected by government decisions should have a say in them. So pretty much anyone who's had like a summer job with a W-2, you've been taxed. Also, child actors' income is legally theirs, but they still have no representation. The only reason that the parents can use their money is because they're the guardians and the financial manager of the child, but that money is made by the child and is legally the child's.
What if we let the children who get taxed vote and those who don't pay taxes don't vote?
Well, we can't do that. We can't let only the minors who pay taxes that fiscal year the right to vote, because that would discriminate based directly on income, which would contradict the ruling of the 24th Amendment, which was no poll tax. Schools get no representation, really. The only representation schools get is from high school seniors, people who work for the school, and parents who are altruistic enough to focus their children's policy benefits over their own. Because the thing is, people simply vote based on what they currently want and need. Life experience isn't really relevant in voting, because if people, already went to school and thus it's already accounted for, why not only let senior citizens vote since they already went through all of life and, thus know best? So life experience, you can't really put a number on it for voting. So that's why we need to let school children to be able to give proper representation for education and also all aspects of life, not just bar them because they don't have enough experience. Also, the reason why everyone is allowed to vote is because each person is in their own circumstance and needs representation for them. But children are being excluded from this. This is why those with cognitive impairments to the point that they can't even legally give consent can still vote, because they represent those with cognitive disabilities, but there's nothing for children. So why not lower the voting age to like 16 or 15? This still has all the same issues, because no matter where the bar falls, there will be people who check all the boxes for being able to vote, but are simply being discriminated against based on their age. So pretty much there's really no reason why children can't vote. And, if you still think that children shouldn't vote, you're like the same people that denied women the right to vote because it's just silly. Also, children would actually benefit the democracy. Only 23% of young people aged 18 to 29 voted in the 2022 midterm election. So the more representation, the merrier. Also, long-term turnout would increase. People who start voting young are much more likely to keep voting, this being called habit formation. Countries with younger voting ages show higher engagement, and we would see similar results. For example, in Austria, which the voting age is 16 there, young voters turned out at rates similar to older first-time voters as compared to the US, where young voters vote almost half as much as older people. So, how would we actually do this, though? Because we can't have someone just drop off their toddler and them get lost, so now they can't vote for Peppa Pig. So, we would first need to repeal the 26th Amendment and make a new one. We would do automatic registration at birth, like how states auto-register people with the DMV. And then we would also implement age tier participation. So people aged 0 through 12 would get parent-assisted voting, and those 13 or above do it on their own. We would also need to teach civics courses earlier in the school curriculum to make up for the general lack of knowledge children have, because, children are kind of stupid.
But even so, children are being unfairly discriminated against. They cannot practice their right to vote even though they are citizens of the United States, so we must step up and help solve this problem, and we must remove the voting age.